This video is a Tennessee Strong Families Grant Organization's webinar on the topic of intimate partner violence. The webinar was recorded on May 1st, 2024, and our presenter was Dr. Ragan Schriver from the UT College of Social Work. Dr. Schriver is an expert in intimate partner violence and also the MSW Program Director at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Please enjoy the webinar.
All right, so here we go. We're going to talk about a few things today, a little bit how to understand a little bit more about screening for domestic violence, and how to notice it. And I think some key areas here to understand are maybe like what are some demographics that we would kind of keep our ear especially attuned to? What are some behaviors? What are some signals that you would see or hear in persons that you're interacting with that might be coming to your services? And how might we approach that so that we can kind of just be aware, so that we can do stuff to try to maybe redirect or support in whatever way that we can. So those are a couple of things that we want to do, and maybe talk a little bit about safety planning, which is a big deal. And it's something I really want to help everybody get is a little bit like what is going on here, like why does this happen, and what's happening with people, and how this can occur. So somebody I'd like to kind of refer to a little bit is a client that actually I've had experience with, and just maybe to share how we've worked with her in the past, and how maybe this would be something that would be sort of just as a touch point for us to understand some of the bigger, higher level concepts I'm talking about, and how we might see this on the ground. So here's Tanya, and she's 26 years old, and she's coming to an appointment. And so, I know like a number of the centers that you all work with may have a little bit of a medical component where you're using ultrasounds or using different, maybe like there might be a nurse practitioner or a medical intervention, and some might be just strictly social. So I'll try to talk about both. So here, Tanya is coming for a program, an appointment at your program. She has children that are 3 and 5 already. So she's coming to you for some support and some help. And she's come to you before, but she's not brought the children. But today she's bringing the children to you. And today it kind of raises an eyebrow, like why is she bringing the kids today? She doesn't normally do that. So then you're kind of like going to ask her some questions and try to understand what her perspective is. And then you see that there is some interpersonal violence that's going on in her life, and she feels at her wit's end, but feels trapped to be in this situation, and feels that she's unable to break out of this relationship that she's in with her male 35-year-old partner, that they are unmarried, but they've lived together for 9 years, and the domestic violence has been going on for a while. So the question is to kind of think about what would be the next steps. So kind of in a passion, let's back up from this particular situation and look at a little bit about just what is domestic violence and what are interpersonal violence, and then what are some of the aspects behind it before we kind of re-enter back with Tanya. So basically, if we think about an overview of domestic violence, or interpersonal violence, which are kind of interchangeable terms, but interpersonal violence seems to be much more of an inclusive term. But I know sometimes we refer to it as domestic violence. But basically, I think we could talk about it as an epidemic level. I feel like ever since the pandemic, there's been much more of an awareness of this, or a little bit more discussion about this, because the things that have happened, because people were sort of trapped in their home. And I use the word trap, that might be but there's that kind of feeling, or that sense of an emotional experience of being trapped. So we would talk about this as being a public health issue from a more macro perspective, that there really is a lot going on. Now, we may think about interpersonal violence or domestic violence as being, a male husband and a female spouse, and the female spouse being, in quotes, the victim, or the survivor in many, many, many cases. And so typically, though, that it's all kinds of across the spectrum. It can be sometimes the female can be the perpetrator. Sometimes it's two males or two females that are involved in this if they're in an intimate partner relationship. There can be many situations where the couple is not married, and many situations where there are children engaged or children involved. It's all constellations of families that this can occur in. There can be children, there can be no children. It's across the board. And you can look here and see on this slide, interpersonal abuse, relationship abuse, dating violence, and domestic violence abuse are all included in this. So if we were to kind of come up with a definition of what we thought intimate partner violence is, basically it's physical, sexual, emotional, psychological harm by a current or former partner or spouse. And this violence, it occurs against in settings where there's same-sex or different sex couples. And it can be a situation where there's not always sexual intimacy. I've seen situations where it could be siblings that have lived together, or maybe just two friends that are living together that do not have a romantic or sexual relationship, but that have just been together for a long time. But it is abusive and coercive, that type of thing. This also could be discussed in terms of coercive control. Sometimes we use the language of coercive control in relationship to like maybe group settings, like a cult or some sort of where there's like a leader that has some sort of control, coercive control, or a group of people that have coercive control over a group of another group of people. But it's the same that can happen, coercive control of one individual over another individual, and it can manifest in what we commonly know as intimate partner violence. So you hear the term coercive control connected to interpersonal violence, and this is what we're talking about, or intimate partner violence is what we're talking about. So just like I said a second ago, physical abuse, sexual, verbal, financial abuse, and stalking are all included in these. And I wish that I had included in this slide psychological, psychological abuse, which does sometimes come along with all the others. Psychological abuse is almost in every case here is almost entangled in the physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But I just think that's a big part of it. It's almost like this, I'm jumping ahead, but it's almost a little bit like the person becomes hypnotized in this coercive relationship that they're in, and whatever method that's being utilized by the perpetrator to encircle the person who would be the victim or the survivor. That's it's almost like a hypnotic experience that the person feels, and I'll expand on that in just a few minutes. So when we're screening or listening for persons who might be involved in an intimate partner violence experience, we always kind of think about physical abuse as being the first thing. That there's hitting, there's some sort of physical contact that's involved, shoving, pushing, and you might see bruises, you might see a black eye, you might see evidence of that. But a lot of times people will be attempting to hide that. Oh, and then sometimes the perpetrator will maybe hurt someone in a part physically of the body that is not typically covered by clothing. So then it becomes unnoticeable to a larger group. This can be revealed a lot of times when the person goes to a medical appointment, or if there's something like that that's going on, that's when you almost can't hide it. And you can't really necessarily, hi, let's sit down. Can you talk to me a little bit and say, hey, show me your arms, or do you have any bruises on you? That's not really a good leading question, when we're talking to somebody. But maybe if you're just keeping your eyes out, this is where doing a screening or an assessment really does need us to keep our antennas up a little bit about it, because this isn't something that I think people are going to be real forthcoming with. There's so much shame. There's so much embarrassment. There's so much fear that if anybody knows about this, A, they're going to blame me. B, if somebody finds out and my partner finds out, then I'm going to pay the price for it. What am I going to do with my children? What am I going to do financially if somebody finds out? There's just layers of shame and fear that are around this. So when we kind of wonder, why didn't the person tell me? So in the case of Tanya, you might have seen her several times, but then maybe here's this one time when she starts bringing her children to the appointment. You wonder, why is she bringing her children? And it's because that there's nowhere else to turn, or there's all other avenues have been cut off for childcare because of whatever's going on in the interpersonal violence. So it's important to think, well, gee, why didn't she tell me before? We've got a good relationship. Persons in these situations, they're very, very closest friends, if they have them, they're very, very closest family members, their own parents have no idea that this is going on. So that's just to know. And so I think sometimes we as providers will think, gee, am I doing something wrong? Did I not notice this? Did I not ask the right question? You could have followed the textbook on interpersonal violence and asked the right questions, the right things. People that are in such a state of fear and shame are so encased in that they can hide it very well, and from the most seasoned observers. So please, don't blame yourself or feel bad or go down a path like that. for yourselves if it hasn't shown up in some of your interviews initially, if you've met a client several times, if that makes sense. So what about this psychological or emotional abuse? This is, I feel like, something much more common, but you don't need clothing to hide it up. It's not going to show up on a bruise. It's not going to show up on a black eye. It's going to be somebody coming who has been intimidated, who's been their value has been undermined. They've been continually talked down to. Okay, so somebody may wonder, why would you put up with this? But this psychological or emotional aspect is gonna appear, whether it's physical, whether it's sexual, whether it's financial, or whatever those things are. This is gonna be an undercurrent to it. So this is maybe a way that I could say this right now. If you think about it, maybe if you think about yourself during the pandemic, we were a couple of years of doing things kind of like where we weren't going out every day. We weren't doing different things. We're kind of like got up, maybe worked at home, did or whatever we were doing, kind of adapted to that for a period of time. So we weren't getting like probably maybe not going on vacations that we would normally go on, or not going out to dinner like we would normally do. So, our brain is going to adapt very easily to a situation that we've got. So sometimes I think during the pandemic, our, new experience muscles became a little bit atrophied. So we got very honed in on what we were typically doing. And then when things kind of opened up again, I don't know if you were like me, but sometimes, wow, I'm going to go to a restaurant. It feels weird to be out here. Like my brain isn't adapted to it. So imagine if this is just sort of a typical scenario, that if I was raised in a situation where I saw my parents, interact violently, maybe like I've been in the initial relationship that I've been in, or maybe this is my second or third relationship that I've been in, and I'm experiencing some of this type of stuff, through my life, my new experience or exploring the unknown muscles of my brain are sort of atrophied and not developed. But the muscles I've got around this way of being are very strong and very used to it. So I'm really clear on how to behave and how to respond and how to react in situations that are tumultuous, that are abusive, that are undermining of who I am, that are devaluing of my self-worth. That's the lane that I feel comfortable in, because that's where my brain is adapted to being. So when people wonder, why in the world would somebody put up with something like this? Well, that's the wrong question to ask. I think the right question to ask is, maybe, what part of your brain, or what things, how have you adapted to this? How have you adapted to survive it in this so long? So that's kind of the question. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think the wrong question is, what's wrong with this person, or why are they engaged in this? But it's just like the trauma-informed response of like what happened to them, what part of their brain is developed so strongly to be able to put them in this situation, that it feels almost like all these muscles that are atrophied to think about new experiences are off the table, because I don't even really know how to do that or engage with that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just a way to kind of think about it. Now, if we're talking about sexual abuse again, these types of things don't show up when initially meeting somebody, or even in an initial. And I think if I talked earlier about that sort of encased in shame, encased in embarrassment or fear, this one is even deeper. That there's such shame, I think, across the board around folks around sexual activity and our sexual selves, that I think that this type of thing becomes even more buried. A lot of times in our area here in East Tennessee, where we are in sort of a Bible Belt kind of area, that a lot of times a religious figure may be somebody that someone might reach out to. Because that's a person that's often seen as very safe and very, a confidentiality level that's even protected by law, that somebody might see a little bit of glimmer of hope that I could reach out to that person. But I think even with sexual issues, oftentimes that's a person that is not comfortable to be reached out to, maybe because they feel so badly that they're going to be judged. Even that completely might not be the case, especially around some of the things that maybe people have been forced to do around, like creating or watching pornography, or doing things that might have been not part of their moral teaching as they were growing up. And so that people get involved in situations like that, then that's a big deal. Now, one area that becomes very important, I think, for folks that are and especially in pregnancy centers, is the area of like a forced pregnancy. so many times a pregnancy will be kind of like, I hate to use a human being as the word anchor, but maybe somebody who's anchored, that baby can be an anchor for an abusive person, to say, look, now the person can't leave me because now we've got this other person, they can't afford to go off by themselves. So it's oftentimes that the abuser, it's not that clearly thought out. Like, if I get them pregnant, then they'll stick with me. But it just sort of like is almost in the same vein for them, that their new experience muscles are sort of atrophied too. They only know one way to behave towards a partner because it's what they saw, what they learned, what they experienced, what their sort of biology is leading them to do as well. So that might just be an occurrence that happens to them. And I think that this is where we need to be, for our standpoint, just to notice that and be aware of that. So anyway, that's just an important thing to kind of recognize, that sort of forced or coerced or pregnancy that maybe like not utilizing birth control when they promise that they would, or something like that. And that occurs. Okay, so just to be clear, different states, which I don't understand why this is the case, but I guess different states have different understandings of what sexual assault or sexual humiliation, or what those some of the things are around the laws. But rape, pretty much across the board, is kind of defined as a bodily penetration. And that's hard to hear. It's difficult to talk about, especially for a person who is a survivor of this. And so when we think about these things that are listed here, those are important things. And sometimes if we're concerned about this and somebody comes and they're pregnant, and maybe you may notice some of the key factors related to interpersonal violence or intimate partner violence, that you might want to ask specifically about some of these things. Did you want this to happen? Were you planning to have a child together? Is this something that you would want? Etc. So those kinds of questions. And I think sometimes we have to use the words when we're trying to do a survey or trying to a screening, that would be made to use the word. Were you penetrated digitally? Did he use his hand? Did he use another object? That's sometimes you have to kind of like ask those questions to kind of get somebody to talk about it. And I think if we convey my uncomfortability with talking about this type of stuff, then it's going to just push the client away a little bit. So if I'm not feeling like I'm using the language, if I said, did he hit you in your elbow? I mean, yeah, it'd be fine to talk about the elbow. Did he penetrate your vagina? I mean, that's harder to talk about. It's just harder to do that. But I feel like it's a part of the body. It's a part of the human experience. And I think it's important for us to use the words and to not come across like I'm uncomfortable with this. This can, I think, be something, maybe if you utilize volunteers a great deal in your settings, I think this is something really to kind of maybe school them up a little bit on how to utilize this type of language and communicate very clearly on what's being discussed. Hopefully that all makes sense, but just to be not afraid to use the language. Okay, here's something that people maybe oftentimes aren't aware of or don't think about, but saw this a lot in my career. Financial or economic abuse. So this is, I love you so much. We're connected in this together. Let's merge our bank accounts. Let's put this together, and then the money becomes out of the hands of one of the partners, of the person who might be a victim or a survivor. And so then that becomes very difficult. Then you really are trapped, not only by your own shame or by your own sort of brain being in one lane or comfortability kind of thing or fear. It becomes, you are literally trapped because you have nowhere to live. You're going to be homeless. If you think back to Tanya, if in her situation, if financial abuse or coercion is somehow involved, then she has nowhere to have the kids cared for. She has nowhere to do anything. Sometimes partners will encourage a spouse to not work. Hey, look, I'll take care of you. Then maybe over a period of time, maybe if they're a nurse, their license goes dormant, then they're just really trapped. There's just all these sort of insidious things that can occur, and just to kind of like corner off a person so that coercive control is really the driving force there, if that makes sense. And you can see some of the things on the slide here that occur around this area of sort of economic or financial abuse. Okay, Verbal abuse, again, is something that you don't see or that you can't look on a bank account or a balance sheet and see, but or on the person's skin, but you hear it, and you can see it. And sometimes people will present this in their interview with you or their interaction with you. Maybe sometimes taking on the verbal the terms that the abuser uses, they'll use those own words about themselves. And again, it's important to ask about this. Hey, is anybody talking negatively to you? Does anybody call you terms that you don't like? And then it may come out, well, my husband, my partner, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, she uses jokes. She teases me a lot. And then I think sometimes if I'm doing a screening and I'm not really, oh, he just teases her. Oh, that's not that big of a deal. But I think it could be gigantic. Hey, can you tell me a little bit? What kind of jokes does he say? What kind of teasing does he do? Well, he tells me I'm ugly, and that, I mean, well, then that's worth more exploring, because I think if the verbal abuse is occurring, either it's the first step towards a path towards towards more physical or more intense types of abuse, or it's just encased in that. So that's really important to just kind of look at. And I think like this blaming one that pops up there under verbal abuse, this is all your fault. Say somebody something, they don't win the lottery. I don't know, something like that. Then the partner who is being the target of the coercive control often becomes the scapegoat for everything that's wrong in sort of the abuser's life or the perpetrator's life. I didn't win the lottery. It's because you didn't take me to the right store, or I this and that, whatever. And it becomes the person's perspective. And then if you're living in a daily experience where you're not getting any other interactions from other people because the perpetrator will often kind of cut off, all you need is me. This is a big deal. In fact, if a person who's experiencing intimate partner violence comes to you at one of your centers, it is a gigantic step that they've made at least one little step to come out and reach out to you. I don't think I can put it strong enough as to what a big deal and what a strength and empowerment it is to just make that one step and come talk to you about it. Because oftentimes the person has been encircled over periods of time where they're cut off. I'm all you need. I'm all you need financially. I'm all you need emotionally. I'm all you need support anyway. And then I need you around all the time. I can't get along without you. And then that makes the person who's been beat down so badly with such a low self-esteem. And then they hear the occasional response of, you're all I need. I need you to help me. And I'm nothing without you kind of thing. Then, oh, I feel good about that. And then I'm connected to the person. Therefore, I don't need anybody else. I don't need my family. And then it just slowly happens where family and friends and coworkers are sort of shut out by this type of verbal continuing in the relationship. Here's another thing that kind of is its own whole thing, but also is a part of it. So just the other day, I was helping her on a little case that I was sort of helping with in a situation where had been a full-blown physical, verbal, sexual abuse that was occurring within an intimate partner relationship. The female in the relationship was male female. She broke away, but then now she sees his car around. She sees his his friends kind of watching her. She's afraid to go to work. Then her colleagues who know what's going on are afraid at their work. So this becomes a bigger picture. So when we think about intimate partner violence, maybe it only affects the victim. It affects everybody. I mean, it affects the children, it affects your coworkers, so this is a big deal. It's like it's a rock in a river that kind of like the ripple goes out. So it's a big deal. And I think this is where people oftentimes, like the client that I was helping with the other day, she was very much afraid to put in for a restraining order because she was scared to death. She knew he was around her and knew that he would get at her anyway. And so she was just scared of that. And so then she cut her relationship off with the justice center that was helping her. And so it just became a difficult situation. So this whole element is a big deal. Again, when we're thinking about screening or talking to clients initially, if somebody comes to your facility, and this is an important question to ask about. And it's also important to question not only for the client safety, but also for your own awareness and your own situation, because you don't want to be caught in the crosshairs of something like this. Here's another element that's kind of new over our past, number of years here, where there's cyber stalking. It's so hard to escape somebody when you're not, and if they're just on the internet, if that makes sense. So this is a big issue to kind of think about as well. Okay, so this is a long history, and so there's books that are written about intimate partner violence that has occurred. So I think that's an important thing to just know, that this is not a brand new condition. This is not brand new. It's as old as time, really, that this type of thing has been going on. I think that I'm going to shut my window here because I think there's some noise going on. So sorry about that. Okay, so just thought I'd shut the window. All right. All right, so here let's just talk about some of the statistics to say that are going on and looking at this from a more public health type of a standpoint. Okay, so according to the Center for Disease Control, which is a really great resource if anybody has to look more information about, 24 people per minute are victims of some sort of these types of violent things that I've just been sort of enumerating. More than 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced some of this type of violence that we're speaking about. These are staggering numbers if you think about it. So I think the reason I wanted to kind of highlight some of these things and even more of the statistics that are on this slide, and I think I have some more statistics as well, is it's so important to have some of these stats at your fingertips, because when you're talking to a client, they feel, and I don't want to put feeling on what everybody's thinking, but this is very common, that they're the only one. I must be the biggest idiot in the world to have let this happen to me, or there aren't any resources out there to help me because I'm the only one that's ever had this experience. And I think because we just don't think about this. So I think it's important to just recognize that there are these statistics. Imagine if I came in feeling like I'm the only person on the planet that this has ever happened to, and you are engaging with me and trying to help me try to engage with me, which is a really important aspect of the screening process, is to really be attuned to the person, look them in the eye, use appropriate words about your body parts. Don't mince words. Don't try to replace words with other things. Does he hit you? Are you afraid? Those specific wording is very important. And when the person shows reluctance and say, well, you must think I'm a big idiot. You must think I'm stupid for having put myself in this situation. You can say, no. Do you know 24 people every minute are victims of something like this? Did you know that 1 in 4 women? And then it's specific, there's gigantic shame around males that have experienced like this. So again, I had a case a few years ago where a woman was the wife, and the couple had children, and she was perpetrating physical harm and abuse on the man. And he was a medical doctor. She was a medical doctor. Everybody, they're wealthy. They go to the country club, the whole thing. This can't be happening, but it was. And finally, he was able to, it was the same exact dynamics played out. Only in his mind, he was afraid to respond physically because he didn't want to, he taught all along, you don't hit women, you don't hit a girl, but then he was just sort of took it. And so maybe a lot to work on there, but just, he was a person there, and he's gotten away from that and been able to, he has a great life now, and things are doing really well for him. So that's great. And she is where she needs to be. So that's great. Well, anyway, I just want to kind of highlight that, just to say that having some statistics like this on our fingertips or the forefront of our head are really important to just be aware of. Okay. So a little bit more about this public health kind of issue. 8 in 10 women who have experienced these types of issues report at least one of these impacts. So when I think about impact, you can think about the resulting event. So of course, fear, of course, concern for safety, and then need for healthcare that oftentimes people do not access, or may go to a primary care physician, and the primary care physician maybe doesn't notice or recognize, oh, I just fell down the steps. Well, okay, all right. Well, I mean, why would I look any further if that's not something that's on my forebrain? But because we know now, because we're talking about it, we know. That's why it's so important to talk about, is that if we don't talk about it, we don't ask about it, it just can slide away from us. Okay, then look at some of this data around 2023 alone. Look at the amounts of money that go towards this. So when we think about well, how does rape cost that much? Well, we think about all the psychological services, all of the legal pursuits that have to occur. You think about all the healthcare things that occur, and the thing with all this of stalking. So like this is a big economic impact, a big public health issue. So it just does impact a big part. So here specifically in Tennessee, and I don't know if everybody's in Tennessee, but if you are, here's a couple things. Again, 1 in 4 reflects the national. It's a little bit less for men, but this is a deal that we have to remember. When we say 1 in 10 men in Tennessee and 1 in 7 men nationally, it could be way more, 5 in 10 men, who knows? Because so fewer report. This is based on reports and estimates based off of the reporting. Okay, so basically the summary of what I've kind of given so far is like a little introduction. I don't know, you're probably thinking, good Lord, the introduction took 34 minutes. But anyway, we'll just kind of keep going here. But like, just this basic bottom line, it affects everybody. No one, if you're at the country club or if you're in the jail cell or if you're in the, Hardee's or if you're in La Maisonette fancy restaurant, wherever you are, that everybody can have an experience of this or have this going on in their life. Nobody can be excluded from it, socioeconomically, racially, gender, all kinds of things. Victims or survivors are affected physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. It's just a deep impact in all aspects of the person's life. So it requires a real holistic perspective as far as treatment or screening, that we're looking at the whole person. If a person comes to you, and maybe it is a situation where there's been a coerced pregnancy or an unplanned pregnancy that maybe was wrongly planned by one of the partners or something like that, that like I think you kind of have to recognize that this is one element in a whole bigger picture. But let's do what we can to address this issue. I don't want to shut out your emotions and your feelings and your other physical concerns that you have going on. But what if we enumerate those? So I feel that if I was going to talk to y'all about trauma-informed care, as I did a couple weeks ago, I would want to say that I feel like collaborative approach to treatment, collaborative approach to engagement with this issue is gigantic. So I feel that you want to get the person's input a little bit, but not a little bit, a lot, as much as you can. Get the person's input into how they want to solve this, how they want to share it with you. What do you want? Give them as much power and control as you can in a conversation that is around screening or asking or assessing for this issue. I say that with a little teeny weeny little sliver of a caveat, and I don't want this little sliver to be overblown. I think the person's brain is aimed at and understands not being in control. The person's brain understands being controlled. So the idea of you coming in and saying, hey, what do you want out of this? What would you like to share with me? Might be a foreign concept and might be perceived as very scary. Hey, wait a minute. I'm not used to making decisions for myself. Every move I make, it took me everything I have to come to visit you today. So it could be a thing where you need to really recognize and stop and think, okay, hey, I want to work collaboratively with you. I know that may sound funny. I want you to know you can rely on me. And so if you can do something to sort of convey that you can lean on me in some way, not an unhealthy codependent kind of a deal, or recreate sort of a controlling relationship. But if there's a little bit of a nod that you understand that they've not been able to make choices for themselves, but you want to help them be able to make choices for themselves, and that you would work collaboratively together. So I hopefully that makes sense, that what I'm saying here makes a little bit of a sense. So their whole person is impacted, emotional, physical, all that stuff. And so when we come in, we engage with them, we want to engage all those aspects of the person, but we also want to help them be able to enumerate what's going to happen first, what's going to happen second in their plan to deal with this or recover from this. And so there's that fine line. You want to give as much autonomy and empowerment and control to the person, because that's what's going to allow them to engage ultimately. But then there needs to be a little bit of like recognition that this person making choices for themselves could be as new as learning how to ride a bike. for somebody that's never ridden a bike before. So it can be very new to them. So sometimes I feel like I know, like as a provider, thought, hey, what do you want to happen? And I feel like, aren't it good for me? I'm giving control to them. That's what I'm supposed to do. And then realize they have no idea what what they want, whatever. They just don't want this to happen anymore, but they don't have any idea how to get out of it or anything. So that's where we need to kind of like, hey, look, and then I think a lot of that is like asking for permission along the way. Like, can I give you some information? Can I give you some advice? So it's almost like a little bit of a sandwich. Can I give you this information? Can I ask you for advice or to give you advice? Can I ask you a few more questions? Then the person gets to say yes or no. They can do that. And then the follow-up in the sandwich is what are you hearing from the advice that I've given you? What are you hearing from the information that I've given you? And clarifying that the person hears it and that they buy into it. Because I think like, hey, what you need from me today is this. Is the wrong way to go, because they're going to either feel it as another imposition of a controlling, coercive person in their life, which may push them away a little bit, or they may comply to you to your face, and then when they go back then to home or wherever they go, then they aren't going to follow up. It has to be some element of collaboration with a sense that you are a safe person and that they can lean on you in a healthy way with boundaries. Not call me anytime, I'm here 24/7. Maybe you'll call this 1-800 number anytime, but me, I'm here to support you within the confines of my work life. Hopefully all that makes sense. Okay. So just something to kind of have in the back of your head, and this is kind of like, I don't know if this is exactly related but I'm just going to keep talking. So I think the thing about like that, every state does look at this a little bit differently. Just like when I was talking about sexual harassment, that there are different sort of state, explanations of this. So I feel like it's important to recognize that. And then how do you get some sort of, if the person does want to get a order of protection, or if they want to do something where they're trying to separate from the spouse or get custody of children or all those things, state laws vary. And I think like we just have to realize that I can't give advice, even if I'm using the appropriate sandwich, the advice sandwich. Like I need to still make sure that I'm bringing in some sort of legal perspective on these things. I think that's just wanted to say that that's really important. So I feel like we've kind of addressed some of the factors that are consequences of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. You can see physical difficulties, broken arms, broken legs. Then also there can happen internal damage that can be long-term. Mental disabilities, I use that word specifically because it's disabling when someone begins to experience paralyzing depression, paralyzing post-traumatic stress disorder. If your body's consistently in fight or flight, it is disabling. It's disabling. So just to remember that it's disabling. So how do we re-enable? Yeah, that's kind of the thing. Unintended or coerced pregnancies, as I mentioned before, sexually transmitted illnesses, infections are a big aspect of this as well that can occur, because even as much as the perpetrator may require certain things of their of the victim or survivor sexually, can be out doing other things, because it's a lot of times it's a very self-centered approach to narcissistic sort of approach a lot of times. So that can be a big factor. Okay, a little bit about pregnancy specifically, that really, if there is a pregnancy involved in an intimate partner violence situation, that it can escalate a little bit more. If the pregnancy was unintended, that can send a great fear alarm in the perpetrator that might lead to stepping up the abuse, either to harm the unborn baby or something like that, because they're so freaked out about it that they didn't expect this, blaming the woman for this. Who knows what all kinds of things might happen, but intimate partner violence and pregnancy escalates it a little bit more. It turns the volume up a great deal. So that's something to remember, that if somebody's coming to you at a pregnancy center and they are pregnant, or have a fear of being pregnant or whatever, that there's an increased level of a risk of violence that's there, or a risk of something that's going on. So that's just to be said. Okay. Then there's a threefold risk of being murdered. So if I'm not pregnant and I'm in an intimate partner relationship that's violent or abusive or coercive, I'm 3 times more likely to be killed in the context of that relationship if I'm pregnant. That's significant. That's significant. And then you just think about if I'm in fight or flight mode, this chemical called cortisol is running through my body. Cortisol is intended to be in the body in brief spurts. I see something dangerous, my brain releases the cortisol. I'm out, I run, I fight, I flee, and then it's resolved. That's what it's supposed to do. But in these intimate partner violence things, you're going to bed feeling fight or flight. You're getting up in the morning. Did I cook the breakfast right? Am I fight or flight? All the things. Am I going to keep my kids safe? You're every 24 hours a day, our cortisol and epinephrine are flooding your body. That's not good for a developing fetus. It's just not good. So how do we do whatever we can to help the person find calm? How can we help the person find mindfulness or that, if there's a way to do that or engage with that as they're kind of exploring help from you? Oops, let's see. Okay, here's another important element to think about. If we think back to Tanya, she's got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. As we know from the adverse childhood experiences study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente in the late 90s, that one of the adverse childhood experiences that they identified, one of 9, was witnessing abuse between their parents, or the mother and a partner or something like that. So if you look at that, 1/3 of reported IPV cases involved at least one child witness. That's a ton. If you think about 1 in 4 women, then you think about 1 in 3 of those situations have a child witness. We've got a lot of kids out there that are really struggling. So in the case of Tanya, maybe we've got somebody on our auto dial that is an expert child therapist that can deal with trauma. And so this is traumatic. It is trauma. You can see 3 times more likely to have a substance use disorder if you've grown up in this situation and witnessed this type of thing. So just all the factors that are risk factors for adverse outcomes for young children who are witnesses to this situation. So in the case of Tanya, I might do what I can to say, hey, Tanya, whatever we can say, can I help you understand, that these kids need to get some help, whatever that would be. And then have a person on speed dial that is an expert in this arena. That's a big deal. So I just really want to kind of highlight that because that's a big deal. And you can kind of see what some of the results on children becoming future. I feel like I don't want people to think that abused is a clear path to abuser. That is not true. That is not true. So I feel like that a lot of times I think I've heard this directly from clients that I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think that I was going to be an abuser too. It does happen sometimes, and it's understandable why it would. It's through social learning theory or through some sort of epigenetic thing. But really, it's just not a recipe. It doesn't have to be a recipe. And I think where our interventions occur can also kind of help that. But just to hope you know that. Okay, you can kind of see some of the other things that I've sort of listed there that are really results of what we all call trauma. There are so many myths out there. So when Brooke shares the slideshow with you, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I just think that these are each very important to consider, because I would bet that 98% of the people that are coming to you in these situations may believe these myths because that's what they've seen or that's what they've heard. I remember when I was a kid, and there was a movie it was called The Burning Bed, and it starred Farrah Fawcett, which when I was a kid, every kid had the poster of Farrah Fawcett in their room. But anyway, so she starred in this movie, and it was where it was just really the first time I think nationally over television that these myths were dispelled through an entertainment movie like that. You think about back in the 80s when that came out, that people were not really aware of it. There's such an awareness now that you wonder, well, how could anybody not know this? People don't know it. So these myths are believed and held, and let's just not forget that. So all this stuff like rape doesn't happen in marriage, or rape doesn't happen in an intimate relationship. It does. If somebody is saying no, if somebody does not give consent, then that is rape. That is sexual violence. And I think we need to remember that just because I'm someone's wife or spouse or whatever does not mean I need to comply with what sexual desires that other person wants. I would need to consent. Consent is active and it is consistent across all activities. So that's important to remember, and I think it's important for people to learn. Even still in 2024, people come and think, well, he's my husband, he gets what he wants, or that kind of thing. And how do we sort of empower people to not experience that? Those mindsets are hard to kind of pull away from. So just to say, then the thing about like that, oh, they're a same-sex couple, that could never happen. That's absolutely not true. Humans are humans, and so this it does occur. Let's see. The deal about, I think women are just as likely to be abusers. Like, what was I hearing? Just a case just recently about how like one person, the male was abusing the female, and the female responded. She pushed him or something. Well, then it became the story was that, well, she's hitting me too. Well, it was it was a response of safety. That was a strength, I think, to try to protect herself. So sometimes those things can be misconstrued or mistranslated into saying, oh, that the woman was the abuser or whatever. So here, let's get into it for a minute of trying to understand a little bit more about why would somebody stay in this situation. And then that, I feel like for me, it brings about a bit of compassion rather than asking, good Lord, get out of there. I have to admit, from a provider, social worker, provider standpoint, it can be very difficult for us. I know sometimes, like when we're worn down, when we're burned out, when we're have like a compassion fatigue, that we've been meeting with clients all day long or hearing difficult stories all day long, and then here's somebody that's you maybe think, well, why are they putting themselves in this situation? They're not. We have to remember that there's some biological and social learning that's gone on, and it's prevented the person from seeing an out. It's almost like being trapped in a well, and you can just the out is impossible. So you can kind of see some of the things here. Fear of losing the person who may be the only point of provision, of financial provision or housing or a roof over their head. This is the only resource I have. This person needs the connection to all the resources. That's usually the result of a long time of maybe the perpetrator sort of cutting off other avenues of support. That's a sort of a narcissistic sort of coercive control approach, is that you become my world or I become your world, and then there's no other supports for you. So then that can come with even like no car, you don't have access to a car, or you don't get a bus pass, or you don't get any of that stuff. And then I think we learn. If I've talked to somebody else about what's going on with me, and then that ends up negatively, if I end up hit or violence treated against me because I've told somebody, I'm going to learn not to do that again. Now, I've written here, fear of deported. I can't go on enough about what a big deal this is with persons who are undocumented. If I've just done everything I can to come across the border and come to this country to somehow build a better life, and just have this, it can be absolutely terrifying to think that I'm going to be sent back to a place where there's abuse and violence there. I'll put up with anything. Just don't send me back. So that fear of being deported is real and huge. So I think that's something really to think about. I know Catholic Charities of East Tennessee and other agencies have offices for immigration support. They can help women through the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. There are ways that a person can get legal status here if they've been victims of domestic violence. So that's something really important to look at. And then that kind of goes back to that legal aspect. That's federal legislation that prevents someone from being deported if they've been a victim of domestic violence. And so that's just something for everyone to remember and to know, and to help people to not stay in the shadows and not be so afraid. Here's a little bit more about there's fear of further violence, as well as isolation and sort of segregation away from resources that are there. Of course, things like I've already mentioned, that there will be more abuse, that there are just threats. I'm going to injure your life. I'm going to hurt your kids. I'm going to whatever is going to happen. You won't get to see your kids. You leave me, I'm going to get custody of these kids because you're a loser. Those types of things that are said to people, horrible things. And then just flat out lack of resources. There's nobody to reach out to. There's nobody to help. There's no transportation. Maybe you're isolated in some sort of way. A little bit more about beliefs and feelings. So it's not only just the victim's threats, the abuser's threats, the perpetrator's threats, the isolation and the walled off from other resources, but also just internal beliefs and feelings. And this is kind of where your brain gets on that pathway of like the my atrophy of new experiences or doing new things. I only know how to do one thing, and that's stay in this. And that's kind of how you kind of feel. Now, here I've got love the abuser there. How could that be? How could somebody who's hitting me, how could I love? How could I love them and care for them? Well, that's real. I mean, you fall in love with somebody, somebody maybe very, very, alluring to you and very, very personable and very attractive. But then once things get more and more, then it can be tough. The person doesn't introduce you with, "Hey, I'm," with abuse. They're introducing themselves with their attractive, wonderful, flashy, good side, and that's a big thing. Another element is the religious aspect. I can't get divorced. Divorce is wrong. I can't leave my spouse because this is a wrong thing to do. I need to stand by. I need to do this. Well, I feel like if you talk to many, this is another thing, a good thing to have on the speed dial is somebody who's a religious figure that could help in these situations. I mentioned earlier that sometimes survivors of domestic violence are a little bit afraid to reach out to a religious figure, especially around the areas of sexual abuse or sexual engagement. But to think that if you've got somebody that's trusted that could give it kind of a blessing from a religious perspective to say, "Hey, look, your survival is most important. Your children are most important." Whatever they can say, that God loves you no matter what. Those types of messages, that would be a really important thing to have as a resource for you. Okay. Here's a couple of things that are just flat out coping mechanisms. If I'm living in a daily experience where there's an onslaught of difficulty and pain and struggle because of the abuse, I need to do something to fortify myself. So you can look here, a couple of these things that are going to help it make sense to you. Minimizing it. Well, it's not that bad. It's only once a week, or it's not that bad. It's only once a day, or he's only mean to me. He's not hitting me. It's just kind of a minimization. And you can hear that oftentimes as the first line of sort of defense and sort of in a screening process. So let's us as providers not buy into the minimization. And then how do we help the person hear what they're saying? He only hits me once a day. He only hits me once a month, whatever. And I think kind of here. Now, if I told you that hitting somebody at all would be a real violation of a loving relationship, how would you hear that? So rather than saying, "Are you crazy? He's hitting you," I think that's what our response wants to be. But I think the perfect question is, "Hey, what if I told you that this?" And the person's probably going to say, "Yeah, I know, but it's not that." So what if one of your best friends was telling you this, and sort of minimizing it in the way that I hear that you are? What would you say to them? And it's going to typically another message. So same thing. Denial. This can be a thing. "Oh, it's not happening. It's really not happening." And I think that people can do this. We can do this to ourselves. It's a real defense mechanism, denial. Rationalization. "Oh, he's just stressed out. He's just really tired. Oh, I did make a bad mistake. I burned the eggs this morning and that was stupid of me. And he's worked so much." So you can hear that rationalization. And then that's where we can kind of like say, wait a minute, that's not true. We wouldn't say that. We would look at it from a more of a perspective of like, I hear what you're saying. Now let's think about that. Would you do that to somebody else if you were tired and worn out? Would you, to try to kind of get at breaking through the rationalization, breaking through the denial, because you're not going to get it with a hammer or whatever, or pushing the person. You're going to get at it or break through some of these coping mechanisms by kind of being on the person's side. "Hey, can I ask you more about that? What would you tell a friend that was experiencing the same thing? What would you tell me if I was telling you that was going on in my life?" Those types of things. And of course, oftentimes drug and alcohol use can be a numbing factor. Like, this is so painful and horrible. I'm going to take whatever medication or whatever is available, or whatever alcohol is available to me. That just is, I mean, I get it. I get it. I'd do whatever I could to numb some pain or whatever if I was experiencing something like this. So why wouldn't someone do that? But then the difficulty is that can create a bit more fear. "Oh no, I'm drunk right now, or I'm high right now, or I'm on something right now. I can't go reach out to help. I can't go to the pregnancy center. I can't go there." I think whatever we can do to say, "Hey, harm reduction. if you're using, who cares? Come on in, sit down, let's talk. Yeah, we'll give you some coffee, sober up. I will lay down here and on whatever. You can take a few minutes, whatever. Then we can talk when your head's a little clearer. And to just show no judgment towards that type of thing. I think that's surprising to people to hear that there's no judgment about any of this. I think how can we take a non-judgmental approach towards all this is a big deal. And of course, self-blame, I caused this, all that type of stuff. And then it isn't like, no, it's not your fault, because they've heard that before. The big deal is like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about what brings about that thought in you? Let's think that through a little bit, and kind of like just poke at it a little bit, and even using things like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think this is your fault? Oh, it's a 10. Well, okay, well, why not a lower number? And then help the person talk about how it could get to a lower number, that it's less their fault. Even if they get to an 8 by the time the conversation's over, you've made a little headway. Okay, now let's get into a little bit more about what keeps people in this situation. Okay, and this is our job as a person, a point of contact that someone's reached out to us, is to stop this wheel from rolling. Okay, so basically it typically starts, and I wish that there was on this slide sort of an entry point. The entry point, or the arrow into that tension building sort of phase, is honeymoon, happiness. This is the best person that's ever happened. I was raised in a situation where I didn't feel loved and nobody loved me, and things were difficult for me. And now I've found sort of a savior in my life, or somebody that's affirming to me, or somebody that's been being kind to me. This is great. So I'll do anything to keep this thing going. But then tensions kind of build, and then the abuser may come home drunk, or there might be some difficulty, or whatever is happening. So then this tension builds, usually tension within the perpetrator. And then there is some sort of an explosion where there's abuse, there's physical abuse, there's sexual assault, there's verbal abuse, there's emotional, whatever may happen. And then the reconciliation occurs. And the reconciliation is so significant and so the person's very sad and very sorry, that it brings about this great deal of relief. And great deal of, oh, thank God that's over. I hope that never happens again. That kind of thing, that relief feels so good that then it leads to a calm phase. Oh my goodness, so glad. But then it can be a day, it could be a week, and then typically the wheel starts rolling faster as time goes on, to where the tension builds again, and then the incident. But then that relief that the person experiences is so amazing that it's almost intoxicating. It's like an addiction. And I don't want to use the word, I don't want that word to be misconstrued. Is he saying that being a victim of domestic violence is that an addiction to this? It's the same dynamic, but it is not an addiction. I would not use that word. I'm very sorry that I would use that word, but I'm just using it as an analogy, that persons who have an addiction or a compulsion for a substance will go through any pain that it takes to get that substance. It's almost like the reconciliation or the honeymoon phase is so rewarding to the person that it's almost like the body is willing to endure the difficulty, because that relief is so great, and the calm phase is so reinforcing. That's a difficult thing, and it almost kind of leads the person to this, almost in quotes, hypnotic cycle that the person is sort of caught in. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but here's something to think about. I'm going to go to this neuroscientifically, if we can say that word. Okay, so if I am being in a violent situation, if I'm in a difficult situation, or I need to my body needs to kick in some sort of fight or flight kind of thing, the amygdala, which is the small part in our limbic system, a small part of our brain, will kind of start engaging, and we'll shut off the front part of the brain, which is rational. So my thinking and logic is all rational up here, and this amygdala is primarily emotional, and it's saying, I need to act to make myself safe. So whatever I need to do, fight or flight, is going on here. And then when that fight or flight chemicals start flowing, it automatically, a part of those chemicals are going to shut off the logic, reasoning, in thinking through things part of the brain. So I'm only going to be acting out of my own self-preservation, my own emotional response. So the brain is making decisions with the emotional part at the wheel rather than the rational part. So somebody that's in a domestic violence situation, they're in a fight or flight, so that prefrontal cortex is shut off. You cannot sit and reason with somebody. Hey, he's hurting you. Hey, this is happening. We just can't reason with somebody because that part of the brain is not being enacted. So how do we kind of connect with the person on a more emotional level and a more relational level to kind of get them engaged with us so that they feel safe, so that their fight or flight stuff calms down, so then the brain can kind of start working together again. That's what we need to do. Calm, relational, attuned with the person in our assessment process or in our engagement process. That's really, really important. And it's important to the brain science of this whole thing. So that's a big deal. So here's another amazing factor. So if I fall in love with somebody, then there's a brain chemical that's released called oxytocin. So this is the same chemical that's released when a mother gives birth to an infant. There's a 10% up to about a 10% increase in the body of oxytocin of the mother and an increase in the infant. So there's that oxytocin is a driver to create a stronger bond between parent and child. The same thing happens with intimate partners. There's an oxytocin that's released. It's like the love romance hormone or chemical that causes this connection. So it bonds one to the other so that you can be good parents, good partners, build a good family together. It's just a sort of evolutionary thing that's developed in us as humans, that this oxytocin creates a bond. So we kind of start to feel good. We feel that feeling of heart pitter patter, eyes batting kind of thing. I feel in love because this oxytocin is kind of flooding through me. Well, okay, if I have a great deal of oxytocin towards this person who's being now my abuser, think about the things that are going on. Okay, it becomes oxytocin, then fight or flight chemicals. Oxytocin, fight or flight chemicals that occur within that cycle of violence. There's a chemical response that becomes no wonder you don't want to leave the person, or you feel like apprehensive about leaving the person because you've got this oxytocin during the honeymoon phase, and you've got this cortisol and norepinephrine during the dangerous abusive phase. So your body is just thrown off. It's thrown off, and the chemicals flooding through you are just kind of upside down. So no wonder somebody stays in the situation that they're in. That's just sort of how it is. It's bodily. That's how it is. And I know like this is probably too much to explain to somebody like in the first minute, hi, my name is, and then go into the oxytocin thing. But as your relationship goes on, and person is wondering, why did I stay in this? Or why am I stuck in this? You don't have to go into whole prefrontal cortex, blah, blah, blah. You could just say, hey, there's some things in your brain that almost make you glued to these situations, and it's sort of a survival mechanism to the human person. But let's kind of try to break out that however that would be. It's kind of a brain response, a natural brain response. You're not crazy. Okay, then to know that all isn't lost with this oxytocin thing. Oxytocin is not only released when we get into an intimate partner relationship, but is also released like when we're with friends. Like, do you ever like when you go out to have friends after work or something, you're just, oh, I feel super connected to these people. I feel really good when I'm with that person. That's what we want to do with people who are involved or in situations with domestic violence, to give them opportunities for oxytocin to be released in other settings so that they can feel connected to other people. It could happen with you. This is what the difficult work that we're in. We're not selling shoes or vacuum cleaners. Our product that we're giving is the self. So when I'm in a relationship with somebody that might be experiencing a crisis like this, that I'm using myself, my own words, my own heart, my own ideas, my own ability to relate to the person, I'm attuning to a human being, and I'm using my real self in this. So we're trying to help the person to feel safe and sort of increase that safety and oxytocin in the other person so that they feel like they want to come back to you and they know that you're going to be safe for them. That's a big deal. So if you can be the first entry point to sort of a outside person where positive emotions are being experienced, that would be awesome. Here's a little picture of what that can look like. You can even get out like a little piece of paper and sort of show, hey, look, see this part of the brain? This is an emotional brain. When you're in danger, this part goes into action. When you feel like you're in love, this part goes into action. And sometimes this front part of the brain that's supposed to be making all the decisions gets left out of the decision-making process. So you can say things like that. It doesn't have to be like the hypothalamus, the ventral medial, this or that. It can be just simple stuff. So basically what I'm saying is that the brain is in conflict, and it sort of exhibits some of these things, like sort of a diminished hearing, even like like hearing, lowered hearing happens, lowered sense of humor, lower ability to see things complexity, because like you want to simplify something as quickly as possible. I'm in danger. I need to see something simple. So offering 20 different opportunities to say, hey, you could go these 20 different places. I think you want to go here or there. Do you want to go home today and then call me tomorrow? Do you want to go to a shelter today and then I'll be here? What are your two options? I think because if a person's in fight or flight, consuming in all this information, the brain really does shut down on that type of stuff. Things need to hone in on how am I going to be safe? And that's what the brain is acting on most of the time. So I feel like if this makes sense. The first thing is what can we do to create some kind of safety? So, and again, this is where what I was talking about earlier is the deal about, okay, let me tell you a little bit about what you're experiencing, what's going on. Now, let me tell you, I feel like safety is going to be our number one thing. Do you feel like that would be important? What do you think about steps to becoming more safe in this situation? Do you think safety is important to you? And then kind of giving a little bit of control and that type of thing. So I feel like all these things about trying to do what can we do to help the person in their pursuit of safetiness. I think that's the word. Okay. So relationship, this is kind of a little bit about what I was talking about a minute ago about using ourselves in the context of the relationship with the person that's coming to seek help. Now, something that we do not want to do, shame them, blame them, convince them, coerce them. This is what they're used to. They don't need this anymore. We don't want to do any of that. We don't want to argue. Hey, look, you have kids. You have a responsibility to care for those kids. That is not going to work. It's not going to work. They're never going to come back to you because they can get that at home. So they're not going to come. So all this stuff about attuning to the client, engaging with the client, being with them is a really, really big deal. So we kind of call these things, our relationship with them, a little bit of a clinical encounter. So one thing to recognize is a little bit of what's going on inside of ourselves. I think sometimes we forget that we're in the room too, and that we have to be monitoring what's going on inside myself and what is what's happening in myself. What am I conveying to the client? What am I conveying to them? If somebody comes in and starts telling me about emotional abuse or domestic violence occurring in their life, I'm probably going to get a little bit amped up about it because I'm going to be nervous. Am I going to do this right? Am I going to say the right thing? Gosh, am I going to be safe? I mean, there's a lot going on. So our emotions are up. The stakes really couldn't be higher. So I think this is a big deal, especially I think if there's a pregnancy involved. I mean, just the stakes are really, really higher. And to realize that everybody's going to have a different approach. There really is not one handbook on you do A, you do B, you do C. It's just not there. But I think if you are revealing that you're in the person's corner, that you're going to be with them no matter what, if they go back to the person, if they come back to you, whatever they're doing, that you're going to be in their corner. Just to be honest, and maybe many of you have worked with these situations before, I don't know how many times out of 10, but a lot of times it takes numerous times to leave. It takes numerous times for a person to be able to get it so that they can break away from the abuser. So we have to still be available and say, I'm not going to talk to you more if you go to him. That's not a carrot that's going to help. It's only going to reinforce the blame, the shame, the negative self-doubt. Well, see, they didn't really like me anyway, that type of stuff. Hey, I'm always here for you. That kind of thing. How are we going to do that? Okay. Just again, a little bit about you're probably going to end up initially, it'll be brief conversations with the person. So if somebody comes in for one reason and you discover that this is going on, then you're going to have to do a little bit of just listening. And what am I going to do if I only have a few minutes with a person? What am I going to do? Advice giving, if you're going to give advice, do it with a sandwich. Shaming, ever, never, never. Oh, you have children, you should be getting a safer situation. That's shaming. That's shame. Providing the discrepancy. You could be safe, but you're in this situation that you providing it isn't going to work. And then giving some extreme consequence, like, you're going to that's just not going to work. or pretending that you're indifferent. Well, if that's the decision you want to make, go ahead. That's not helpful either. All this is evidence-based. Research studies have shown that those things don't work. What does work is helping the person to develop discrepancy. Okay, now you've just told me that you're really afraid, but you are really afraid of what's going to happen to you tonight when you go home. But yet you just said that you can't wait to get home to make sure things are okay. How do these two things live together in you? Let's talk about that. Does that make sense? Helping the person develop the discrepancy. Let's talk about this. And then when the person says, well, I am afraid, then we kind of help say, can you tell me what the fear looks like? What is the fear? What does the fear bring up in you? Then talk about the thing. And then you maybe can start talking about, well, what can you do to reduce fear? What for you reduces fear? Well, going home, doing what I'm going home and making the eggs and not burning them. Whatever it is, to think about like what can you do to reduce the fear? Heightening awareness. This stuff about like other people experiencing this, 24 people a minute, 1 in 7 women, that kind of thing, just heightening the person's awareness that you're not the only one. This is a real issue. You're experiencing a syndrome. This is for real. This is something not to run away from. And then providing information. Hey, now I'm going to give you this website, or I'm going to give you this pamphlet. But if you give a pamphlet, remember that probably if they aren't going to take the pamphlet because it could be found by the perpetrator at home or whatever that is. How can you get information to the person in a way that's safe? And then even it could be like, I'm going to give you one piece of information, whatever it is. And can you hang on to that? Yeah. Tell me about it. How are you going to hang on to it? Whatever it is. Okay. Curiosity. I think that this is a big deal. So client has to know that you're an expert in your area. So yeah, I have to know that you know what's going on and how to handle stuff like this. But I think also heightened curiosity on our own part is going to be really important. I'm curious. How would you handle that? Can I encourage you to be curious? Just be curious. What would it look like if you didn't live in that house? What would it look like if you left so-and-so? Can you tell me a little bit, what would that look like to you? Just be curious about it. Well, I'm going home. I got to go get out of here, the client says. Then if you're saying, I'm just asking you to be curious, just think about this. Imagine your life not there. What would that look like? So that's I love that phrase. Hey, let's just be curious together. What would it be like for you to not be there? Or what would it look like? Just, you're not telling them, hey, you got to get out of there. You're saying, let's be curious about it. Then what can we do? And if they become more and more curious, then they might take more and more steps to try to do it. Okay. So there's one quick thing that I kind of want to say, and then we probably should take a few minutes to answer questions and stuff, but like a little bit about ambivalence and the writing reflex. So I've got an image here of two, I guess those are rams or something, butting their heads against each other. I know as human beings, you and I have what we call a writing reflex. Writing reflex. I want to make it right. This person is doing something that's harmful. I'm going to fix it. That's just our natural mode. But we kind of have to park that for a little bit and realize that there's another way to make things right. And that's to help the person and enter into the ambivalence with the person and enter into that curiosity with the person. Because if I'm saying you need to leave him and he is saying, I can't do it, then this is going to be this. And then the person is going to eject. They're never going to come back to you again. Or if they do, they'll just agree with whatever you want and then go home and do what they've always done. So I feel like me dictating, me giving advice, I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself. But how do I engage with the person? And these are the ways. Asking open-ended questions. Tell me about this. Affirmations. Wow, what strength it took for you to do that. Reflecting back. Now, you just told me that you are worried about the safety of your children. Now you just told me that. Reflecting back what the person said. Just reflect back. A lot of times the person has the answers. Not a lot of time. I think all the time. The answers are in here somewhere. How do we help access that? And kind of, again, summarizing back what the person is saying to you so they can hear themselves, that they know what they need to do, and you're there to sort of help implement whatever plan that they can come up with or the plan that you two work out together. Okay, so these are just more expansion on what reflective listening stuff is, because that's going to be your key, not telling the person you have children, you need to get to safety. It's a little bit more out there. Now, the question becomes, which of these 4 skills are you best at? wow, I'm really good open-ended questioner. I can really do that stuff really well. Well, I'm not as good at that, but boy, I sure can affirm somebody. I can affirm people. Pick your thing that you're really good at and make that your home base. Because when you want to start going towards that writing reflex, okay, I find myself writing, I'm going to go back to affirming the person. Okay, I found myself, trying to tell them what to do or dole out some advice without the sandwich. Um, all right, I'm going to reflect back, just reflect back what they're saying. Find a home base for yourself, because sometimes when you get overwhelmed with the emotions, sometimes when you get this writing reflex kicks in. There's in one of my classes, we talk about the advice monster. Like there's just this burning desire inside of us that's burning, busting out to just give advice. I have the best ideas. Everybody should hear them. But then this deal about like, how do I elicit the advice inside the person? Um, so uh, let me just say this real quick, that when we are listening and engaging in active listening and using affirmations and opening questioning, we're going to listen and we're going to hear some of the desire to change. We're going to hear some commitment to make some differences in their life. We're going to hear that stuff. And we start hearing that, what we call change talk. When we hear change talk, we maximize that in the conversation. Now, did you just say that you thought your sister would have a guest room in her house for you to stay in? Is that what you just said? Yes. Well, now, what would that look like? Do you think you're able to do that? Now, because the person may have said to you, my sister has a guest room, but if I drive there, I know she's going to be mad at me, and my spouse is really going to just whatever he does. You don't focus on my sister's going to be mad, my spouse is going to be mad, my kids are going to be scared. Don't highlight any of that. Highlight, now you mentioned the guest room. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. And then you're highlighting the resource, or you're highlighting the change aspect, not the negative aspect. So I think sometimes our tendency through our bias is to focus on the negative part. Oh, like, your husband's gonna be mad. Well, gee whiz, that's gonna be tough. Let's not focus on that or join in on that. Let's join in on the fact that your sister has a guest room, or your husband's out of town this week. You could do something else, whatever. You're focusing on the change part, the change talk, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh, here, this is one thing for us to really avoid as providers, as people that are engaged with persons who are engaged in domestic violence. Okay, if we put ourselves in this drama triangle, that's kind of I like that word. That if here's somebody comes to us, and I'm here to save the day, and that other the persecutor is the bad guy, then we start posing that person as the bad guy. Then we look at the victim as whatever, and then we become their only source of resources. I feel like that just creates this triangle. So I think really it's not to condemn the other guy, or woman, whoever it is. I shouldn't have said to condemn the other person in the picture. Is to not condemn them, not bad mouth them, because that could end up just creating a bit of a drama. And if you set yourself up that I'm your only resource, then you're just repeating what the persecutor is doing. So we are a resource for you, and I am here for you, and this hotline is here for you, or whatever it is. But like, really, I'm here for you. So we have to recognize that. If I find myself feeling good because I'm that rescuer, then I have to check myself a little bit. What am I doing here? Am I denigrating the persecutor? Because say like I start talking down about the persecutor, then the victim and the survivor in the situation start looking at you as the enemy, because hey, look, this guy's feeding me, this guy is housing me, this person is whatever they're doing, and then a halo effect around the persecutor, and then will distance from you. Just your focus is on the client in front of you. What strengths do they have? What do they want? What are they going to do? How are you going to be there for that kind of thing? Hopefully that makes sense. The drama triangle is going to get you nowhere. Okay. Well, this was going to go into a little bit about. Oh, let me just say one thing before we can have questions. I don't know too long, but I think some of the things today, a lack of awareness. You guys have broken through that barrier for you to be the best provider that you can be. It's to be open to learning more about it, and there's tons of resources. Also, you feel like maybe sometimes I don't want to talk to this person because it rings a bell in me, too painful for my own background, or whatever experience I saw when I was growing up, or whatever. It's just too hard to hear. We need to kind of work on that. Maybe we can get some therapy for ourselves, or a good supervisor that we can work through some of these emotions about. If you feel uncertain on how to intervene, just listen and be there. Be there with the person. Just be there with them. That's all it takes. And sometimes you kind of feel helpless, or you just, I've got to change or fix this thing. Just undo that writing reflex. Don't get in the triangle. Remember, what you can to do, ask open-ended questions and things like that. So I feel like those are just some things to think about. And here at the end, I've of course gotten too many slides that you all can look at when you are. One thing I wanted to say about Tanya, just quick thing on Tanya, that what you can do, gain access, gain trust. By gaining trust isn't like telling somebody, hey, trust me, everything's going to be okay, but it's going to be, hey, I'd like to earn your trust. What would that look like to you? That's going to be important. Assess everybody's safety. That's got to be first. Is everybody safe? Is somebody getting ready to be really harmed here? And then kind of looking at what's the reaction to the provider? What is their reaction to you? I think an assessment there, how are they responding to you? Are they looking at you in the eye? Are they engaging with you? Those are telltale signs of what might be going on at home, but it's also a telltale sign of how you can best relate. And then on this PowerPoint slides, there's a thing, the Empower model. Hopefully you can check that out when you get it. And then I think really one of the last things to talk about when you would leave is some sort of a safety plan. And then in this PowerPoint, there's an example of a safety plan. Feel free to Xerox it, use it wherever you want, far and wide, and you can use that when you come across clients. So, all right. Well, again, here's some validated screening tools that you can use, and the links are here and they're live in the PowerPoint. And then here's some other resources that you could kind of use. So, I'm going to stop sharing.
This video is a Tennessee Strong Families Grant Organization's webinar on the topic of intimate partner violence. The webinar was recorded on May 1st, 2024, and our presenter was Dr. Ragan Schriver from the UT College of Social Work. Dr. Schriver is an expert in intimate partner violence and also the MSW Program Director at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Please enjoy the webinar.